Hey guys, I'm back with another video for this unit, the interactions of branches of government. And this is on the federal bureaucracy, also known as the fourth branch of government. So I was making these videos all day yesterday. So I know when I came to actually record them yesterday, it seemed like I was just reading. I was a bit, the enthusiasm wasn't there. So I hope I can return some of that enthusiasm with today's video. So where does the federal bureaucracy come from under the Constitution? And it comes from Article 2, a constitutional review of bureaucracies. And Article 2 refers to the creation of executive departments. And it's the result of custom, tradition, and precedent. And I had a story to go with why I chose this image. Because I guess the bureaucracies under the Trump administration, their main goal has been to actually undo the bureaucracy's accomplishments under the Obama administration, which is a little bit of a break of the norm to not have your own agenda as much of just to undo another. All right, so what are the keys to policymaking? What is a bureaucracy? It actually comes from a French word bureau, which is like a government worker, and cracy is dealing with a form of government. So bureaucracies are defined as large administrative agencies, and that's what they are. So they all have some things in common, some similar characteristics, even though they're all different. They reflect a hierarchical authority, as you see here in this example of the cabinet of the Secretary of State. They all have a job specialization. So if you're working for like the FDA, you should have something in your background that has you trained in food and drugs. They all have lots of rules and regulations. There's over 4 million workers in America that belong to these bureaucracies. A lot of them come from our armed forces or our defense industry, about a third. And only about 10% actually are in DC. Think about it. Every state has Social Security offices, post offices. So even though they all may be part of the federal government, that doesn't mean that they're all in DC. And they are hired to be in this bureaucracy as a result of civil service regulations or through political patronage, like somebody. So how do they all hold each other accountable? Well, the Constitution holds bureaucracies accountable. So do federal laws. So do the dictates of the three branches of government, their superiors or their bosses, the public interest that stays on top of them, especially through the media, and also through interest groups. Okay, so how are they set up? They are organized by departments. Agencies and administration refer to governmental bodies that are headed by a single administrator and have a status similar to the cabinet. They may be investigative, they could be advisory, or they can be reporting. Corporations and agencies headed by a board of directors and have a chairman as head. So they might call themselves a chairperson or a director in charge, depending. Sorry, I think I'm going to sneeze any second. Okay, so responsibilities and checks. So how do they check on the day-to-day government? So we have 5 different ways here. The legislative power of Congress through legislative intent, congressional oversight, and restrictions on appropriations to agencies, like how much money they give them. Second would be the Administrative Procedure Act of 1946. That defines administrative policy and directs agencies to publicize their procedures. So they have to be transparent in what they do. They have a built-in review process, either internal, within their own agency, or through a court system for appeal of agency decisions. Like the courts can be like, oh, we don't think this agency did the right thing. Fourth, the oversight function of agencies such as the Office of Management and Budget and the General Accounting Office. And fifth, political checks such as pressure from interest groups, political parties, the private sector, and they sort of modify bureaucratic behavior. So the current director of the Office of Management and Budget is Russell Vought. And the image to the left, that is a building that is in Washington, D.C., the Office of General Accounting, so the General Accounting Office. That's also shared with the Army Corps of Engineers headquarters. And it was, what do you call that when you open a building? The red cutting ceremony, dedicated on September 11th, 1951. So a date that's sort of easy to remember. So how do they relate with other branches of government? They're linked to the president by appointments and their direction, and to Congress as Congress has oversight over them. They're inherently part of the executive branch. Even though they're quasi-independent, they have to be sensitive to president's policies, right? The presidents often put the people who are in charge of this. And executive orders can sort of help dictate what they are to do. And the executive branch also has the power to reorganize federal departments. For example, Reagan wanted to completely get rid of the Department of Energy and Education. We know that didn't happen. So right now, you've probably heard of her a lot. The Secretary of Education is Betsy DeVos, but coming under Biden's administration, it will be Miguel Cardona, who is currently the Secretary of Education for Connecticut. Now, because they also have to be sensitive to the agenda of Congress, these bureaucracies, these departments often have to testify before Congress. And the image below shows that Betsy DeVos has testified before Congress many times. I don't know the exact number, but it's been a lot. But what really are they? The first thing they are is you have to realize how much these agencies actually play a part in your lives. So if you ever use cable TV, if you check food labels, right? If you want to make sure you have good meat, if you care about pollution, airline safety, we learned a lot about that your freshman year. Your home appliances are safe. Seatbelt mandates, gas mileage standards that, you're going to get so many miles out of a car, it's gas. For mediation, for labor disputes, for factory inspections to make sure you're working in safe conditions, relief efforts, if there are floods or hurricanes. These are all areas that bureaucracies, these departments play a role in. So that's because what they first are policy-making bodies. And an important term to know for this unit is the Iron Triangle Network. So it is a pattern of relationships between an agency in the executive branch, Congress, and special interest groups that lobby that agency, right? So an example of this would be the military-industrial complex. For example, during the height of the Vietnam War, the relationship between defense-related government agencies and the private industry that profited off of the war industry, making munitions and things. A lot of people, especially anti-war people, said, this is a misuse of funds. So you see an example here of different types of Iron Triangle networks, right? So just sort of know it's, there's the bureaucracy, you have an interest group, and you have other committees that are involved. A little political cartoon mocking the idea of the military-industrial complex. Okay, so we have executive level departments. So under the executive office, you have the National Security Council, the Council of Economic Affairs, the Office of Management and Budget, and the Office of National Drug Control Policy. These executive level departments were created in 1939 under FDR. The National Security Council is the lead advisory board in the area of national and international security. It includes things like the Vice President, Secretaries of State, Secretaries of Defense, the CIA, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, National Security Advisor, so on and so forth. You have the Council of Economic Advisors. Those are individuals who are regarded as leading economists. They are approved by the Senate and help the president make his annual economic report to Congress. The Office of Management and Budget is the largest agency in the executive office. Its director is responsible for the preparation of the massive federal budget that has to be submitted to Congress in January every single year. It also oversees Congress appropriations, so how they spend their money. All right, it has a lot of policy-making capacity because of its budget recommendations, right? Whatever agency gets more money, it sort of shows you like where the policy can go. And it's the president's direct link to a lot of those agencies. Then the Office of National Drug Control Policy. It's a recent addition. You often hear of a drug czar, right? They fall under that. The responsibility is to prepare recommendations on how to combat the problem of drug abuse. It also coordinates policies of other federal agencies. The Office of Policy Development, the Office of Science and Technology, the Council on Environmental Quality, like a lot of people sort of are connected through this one. All right, so we have here Donald M. Benton, who's the director of the Selective Service, and James Carroll, who's the current White House National Drug Control Policy Director. So why did I include Benton? Because other agencies that aren't this executive level, but have an important part of foreign policy, you have INS, Immigration and Naturalization Services. They deal with people from other countries seeking residence in the U.S., and they're charged with informing immigration policy, something we've heard a lot of these days under the Trump administration. We have the U.S. Information Agency. That's sort of like the propaganda part of the U.S. It uses the Voice of America and shortwave radio to get policy abroad. U.S. Arms Control and Disarmament Agency, Selective Service System, right? That's sort of to run the draft. And you'll see the ones with the asterisk are because they don't actually even exist anymore. So if you read some AP books, they won't mention that, but it's important to know that they no longer exist. So the federal government is organized around a lot of other executive level departments. So that would be the cabinet. The cabinet has 15 departments. They're each headed by a secretary, except for the Justice Department. That's headed by the Attorney General. The secretaries are appointed by the president with consent of the Senate. And each department also has their own series of undersecretaries, deputies, assistants, right? They don't do this all by themselves. Then you have regulatory agencies, and they are quasi-legislative and quasi-judicial. And they're also known as the alphabet agencies. So here's some examples. We have the ICC, Interstate Commerce Commission. It regulates specific areas of interstate relations. The Federal Trade Commission, it regulates trade, encourages competition, looks for things like unfair advertising. The Food and Drug Administration regulates contents, marketing, and labeling of food and drugs. Remember, the book The Jungle is what helped spur the creation of the FDA. The Federal Communications Commission regulates TV and radio industry and grants licenses to TV and radio stations. Securities and Exchange Commission, this came about during the New Deal. It regulates the sale of securities and stock markets, preventing things like insider trading. And the Environmental Protection Agency responds to the energy crisis, helps implement laws like the Clean Air Act. Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, sets safety and health standards for the workplace. Consumer Product Safety Commission tests and reports about products that may injure the public and issues warnings. And the Federal Election Commission, well, that's been in the news a lot lately. It was created by the Federal Election Campaign Act of 71, and it made it even more important as a result of election abuses uncovered by Watergate. And they monitor campaign contributions and provide some funding to presidential campaigns through matching grants. So I put some of the directors. You might notice they all sort of look similar. Some things that are interesting, the head of the FDA is actually a medical doctor. Andrew Wheeler, the head of the EPA, one of the reasons why he was sort of controversial when he was appointed was because he was a lawyer who actually worked for the coal industry. David Robbins of the FTC, he is a Jersey guy. For all you comp sci people in our STEM academy, he was a comp sci major at Rutgers and graduated in 86, I think it was. And then he graduated from Seton Hall, another New Jersey school, in 1995. I had a little story on each of them, but I think those are the most interesting. And last, some examples. How does compliance monitoring work? All right, so it's one of the key components that the EPA uses to ensure that the regulated community obeys environmental laws and regulations. It encompasses all their activities to determine whether a facility is in compliance with the law. So they formulate and implement strategies. They monitor on site. They monitor off site. They inspect. The inspectors get training and credentials, and they do things to support the instructors. So if you actually go to the EPA website, you see here all different examples of how you can learn about their compliance monitoring. And also, which is interesting, is you can see that they made sure that they can't take revenge on companies. They want to make sure they have a good working relationship to make these laws efficient. Congressional oversight. It's another way that Congress can check the president. Constitutional amendments, election of a president and a vice president, impeachment, all these things, and congressional oversight are used by Congress to influence and determine public policy. So they are used to make sure that these bureaucracies are running smoothly, that they are protecting people's civil liberties and constitutional rights in these agencies, that they are not being run poorly. They inform the public about them. They gather all sorts of data and make sure that the executive branch isn't encroaching on legislative authority and legislative prerogatives in there. So we have some various examples of when things have changed. So after the 2018 midterm elections, Democrats on the House Judiciary Committee issued requests for documents from 81 different individuals related to the investigation of Russia meddling in the U.S. investigations, with a possible conspiracy to President Trump or the Trump campaign, possible obstruction of justice by the president, and actions taken by the Trump organization in relation to Russia. These requests, as well as hearings run by the House Intelligence Committee and the House Committee on Oversight and Reform, illustrate the extent of congressional oversight by a majority party, in a specific instance here in the House. So when the Republicans had the majority during Obama's administration, they held extensive oversight hearings on action taken by President Obama. So that's really nothing new, but it is part of their role to do this. Okay, so another example, Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act of 1974. These are efforts to control the budget. Prior to 1974, Congress budgeted in like a crazy haphazard manner. The process was decentralized with all these different subcommittees of each house, an agency by agency basis. And until the bottom line was totaled, like after all this, there was no certainty in what that final budget would be. So this act passed to streamline this entire process. It gave controls on the president's ability to determine allocations for these agencies with appropriate congressional checks, right? So they were both involved. Before this was passed, Nixon, who comes up a lot in these examples we've been doing these past few videos, used his authority to cut off funds for programs that he thought would increase the deficit. Congress responded by passing this law, which did place an additional check on the president. It prevented the president from impounding previously allocated funds without congressional approval. So if these funds were already going someplace, the president could not stop them from going there. It also provided for other important things: budget calendars with built-in procedures, creation of a budget committee, creation of a congressional budget office that established a timeline. And Congress can view this process from start to finish, not just sort of like at the end. It did not really do anything to stop the deficit. It just sort of helped make the budget more transparent. The head of the Congressional Budget Office is Phil Swagel. He is their director. He also has New Jersey connections. His undergraduate degree is in economics from Princeton University. All right, and that's it for now. And it's probably the last video that you'll get from me being made over winter break, if you're going to be checking for them. Let me know if you have questions. Make sure you get some notes done. All right. See you guys.